In 1943, while the world was at war, one of the deadliest events of the 20th century unfolded in British India. It wasn't a battle, but a famine. Officially known as the Bengal Famine of 1943, this catastrophe claimed between 2 and 4 million lives in the region that is now Bangladesh and West Bengal. That's more civilian lives lost than in almost any other single event in the history of the British Empire, second only to the partition of India itself. And yet, for decades, the full story of what happened remained hidden, often misrepresented, and is still largely missing from school textbooks today. So, what really caused the Bengal famine? Was it just a tragic act of nature, or were there other forces at play? Let's uncover the facts that were kept classified for nearly 70 years. The standard explanation you might have heard is that the famine was caused by a perfect storm of natural disasters. And it's true. In late 1942, a powerful cyclone hit Bengal, followed by a fungal crop disease that damaged the winter rice harvest. This did reduce the available food supply. But here's the crucial point. Historical data shows that the food shortage, while real, was not nearly severe enough on its own to cause a famine of this magnitude. In fact, the total available rice in Bengal in 1943 was actually higher than it was in 1941, a year when there was no famine. So, if there was enough food to go around, why did millions starve? The answer lies not in the fields of Bengal, but in the corridors of power in London and Delhi. To understand this, we need to remember the context. World War II. In 1942, the Japanese army had conquered Burma, which was right on Bengal's doorstep. Fearing a potential Japanese invasion of India, the British War Cabinet, led by Prime Minister Winston Churchill, implemented a series of drastic policies. One of these was the denial policy. This was a scorched earth strategy designed to deny resources to an invading army. Under this policy, the British military confiscated and either moved or destroyed tens of thousands of small boats, which were the primary means of transport for food and goods in Bengal's river-filled landscape. They also seized huge quantities of rice from coastal areas. This action instantly crippled the local economy and transportation network, making it impossible for food to move from areas of surplus to areas of need. At the same time, the war effort demanded enormous resources. Bengal, being a major industrial and agricultural hub, was heavily impacted. The British government began what was called priority procurement. This meant they purchased vast amounts of rice from the Bengali market at fixed, often low prices, to feed the military, both Indian and Allied troops, and to build up strategic stockpiles. This massive government buying spree, combined with hoarding by speculators who knew prices would rise, created an artificial scarcity. Suddenly, rice began to disappear from rural markets. For the average Bengali villager, the price of their staple food skyrocketed, increasing by as much as 400 to 600% within a matter of months. A bag of rice that once fed a family for a week was now completely out of reach. As food vanished from the countryside, a human tragedy of unimaginable scale began. Millions of desperate people, landless laborers, artisans, small farmers were forced to abandon their homes. They began a long, agonizing trek towards the city of Calcutta, now Kolkata, clinging to the hope that the government would provide relief there. But the city was completely unprepared. The streets became clogged with starving, destitute families. Eyewitness accounts and photographs from the time, which are truly harrowing, show skeletal figures collapsing on the sidewalks. Public health systems broke down entirely, and diseases like cholera and malaria swept through the weakened population, claiming even more lives than starvation itself. The social fabric of Bengal was torn apart. While millions were starving, what was the response from the British government in London? The Viceroy of India, Lord Linlithgow, and other officials on the ground began sending urgent telegrams to London from mid-1943, begging for emergency food shipments. They warned Churchill's War Cabinet that a catastrophe was unfolding, but their pleas were met with resistance. Cabinet minutes, which were declassified only in recent years, reveal a shocking series of decisions. Offers of grain from allied nations like Canada and Australia were turned down. The United States also offered to send food on American ships, but this too was initially rejected. The reasoning from London was that all available shipping had to be prioritized for the war in Europe, yet records show that ships carrying other goods, like tobacco, continued to sail from India to Britain. More disturbingly, at the same time that millions were starving in Bengal, the UK was building up massive stockpiles of food including grain and sugar in Britain, intended for the people of Europe after the war was over. Even as the famine reached its horrific peak in late 1943, rice was still being exported from Bengal to supply British troops in other parts of the world. Churchill himself repeatedly questioned the severity of the famine in cabinet meetings and expressed reluctance to divert resources. His focus was fixed on winning the war in Europe, and the crisis in Bengal was treated as a secondary concern. It wasn't until October 1943, after a new viceroy, Lord Wavell, arrived in India and was horrified by what he saw, that the British Army was finally ordered to take control of food distribution. This marked a turning point. The military's logistical expertise helped to get food into the hardest-hit areas. Large-scale imports of grain finally began to arrive in late 1943 and early 1944, but by then, it was too late for millions. The worst of the famine had already passed, leaving a trail of death and devastation in its wake. The immediate crisis slowly subsided, but the long-term consequences were profound. In the aftermath, the British government established the Famine Inquiry Commission to investigate the causes. The commission's final report, published in 1945, largely placed the blame on natural causes like the cyclone and crop failure, along with local factors like panicked hoarding and inefficient provincial administration. It downplayed or outright ignored the role of British wartime policies, the denial policy, the massive military procurement, and the refusal of timely aid. The full cabinet records and telegrams that detailed the decisions made in London remained classified for decades, effectively cementing a narrative that absolved the central government of its responsibility. This official version of events became the one taught in schools and repeated in history books for generations. So why is this critically important chapter of history still so little known? For one, it complicates the popular heroic narrative of Winston Churchill as the savior of democracy during World War II. Acknowledging that policies he oversaw led to the deaths of millions of colonial subjects paints a much more complex and troubling picture of his leadership. For a long time, both British and even Indian educational systems preferred to stick to the simpler story of a natural disaster, made worse by local issues. It's only in the last decade or two, as historians have gained access to the complete, unredacted wartime archives, that a more accurate account has begun to emerge. Even today, in 2025, the Bengal Famine of 1943 is conspicuously absent from most major school curricula, in both the UK and India. The legacy of the famine is deep and lasting. For many Indians, it was the final, brutal proof that their lives were considered expendable under colonial rule. It fueled immense anger and strengthened the resolve of the Indian independence movement, which was already gaining momentum. The tragedy also served as a powerful lesson for the world. It highlighted the deadly consequences of prioritizing political and military goals over human lives, and became a key case study in the development of modern international famine prevention policies. It showed that famine is rarely just about a lack of food. It is almost always about the politics of who gets to eat. The story of the Bengal famine is a difficult but essential one. It's a reminder of how policy decisions made thousands of miles away can have devastating human consequences, and why uncovering and remembering these hidden histories is so crucial. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more deep dives into history. Let us know in the comments what other historical events you'd like us to cover. See you in the next one.